Hunter x Hunter was a great show, and I can absolutely see why it's one of the classics, despite the unfinished feeling you get at the end. I've already done more episode-to-episode, arc-by-arc reviews for the entire series, so this will just be my general concluding thoughts now that I've seen it all the way through. My rank for the arcs would be York New City, Chimera Ant, Hunter Exam, Zoldyck Family, Heaven's Arena, Greed Island, and the 13th Hunter Chairman Election arc in last place.
And boom goes the dynamite.
I think the Chimera Ant arc probably accomplishes the most, especially given the length. I just love the dynamic of all four characters in the York New City arc and how tight that arc is overall. The Greed Island and 13th Hunter Chairman Election were definitely the weakest for me, mainly because they feel like filler. They weren't terrible, but Greed Island felt essentially like a really long training arc, and the election felt weird because it felt kind of like a filler while also being the end of the series and just giving a really inconclusive ending, which is why I have it at the bottom. I know the manga continues with Kurapika's story, but I haven't read it. I've heard mixed things, but if the author's health seems like it improves, even though he's almost 60, and it might actually have a chance of finishing or at least getting a lot of chapters consistently, I'd definitely be interested in reading it. But for now, I'm just going to hold off while it seems kind of ambiguous what's actually going to happen. For my full season reviews, I like to go through things I liked and then the issues that I have with a show or series. So the things that I liked were obviously the main crew and their dynamic, the antagonist, the commitment to the story to let things follow a logical path and conclusion and really go all the way with it. I like the Nen and the way power scaling is handled in this story, and the exploration of the world to make it feel big and not like everything just revolves around a couple people in one location. The things that I had issues with were obviously the inconclusive ending that I already mentioned, some aspects of the world building, Gon's dad Jing, and some of the pacing decisions. Obviously none of these are a huge deal, but I think they should at least be acknowledged. Let's get on to the positives first. The first positive for me is the characters. They're great. I love the main crew in particular and their dynamic together and their interactions. I like Kurapika and his revenge motivation. You have Gon, who's more of your stereotypical shonen protagonist, super optimistic, always positive. You get Leorio being the comedic relief, but he's kind of a real bro throughout the story when he's needed to be serious. And then Kalua's transformation from an antisocial psychopath to becoming much more open with people and caring about people openly. It's just wonderful. I like Gon's never-ending positivity for a majority of the show to balance out the people around him, and it makes his slide into revenge and despair great when it finally happens after the massive build-up to it. Kalua's background and his assassin family is really cool, but seeing him emotionally destroyed and helpless when it comes to Gon by the end, I thought was one of the most emotionally compelling parts of the whole show, and it's definitely one of those things that feels earned due in part to how much time you spend with them. I really enjoyed Leorio's rough backstory, but that he's mostly a lighthearted character who just gets serious when it comes to his friends. He's just kind of the classic character that you'd want to be your best friend in real life.
My nigga.
I was worried that Kurapika would be kind of an edgelord in the beginning, but I really liked how dynamic he was, where he's much more vulnerable and honest with his friends, but ruthless to his enemies. And he might be the most relatable character in a realistic way in the show. The antagonists are just as good as the main characters, and maybe even better. Hisoka is super fun. Obviously a total psychopath that just lives to fight. I really like him outside of his random boner for Gon.
Oh, that's nasty.
And he does end up giving Gon and Kalua advice and help repeatedly. So for a majority of the show, he actually ends up on the main character's side, even if it's for nefarious reasons. It's really a shame that the show ended without the conclusion between him and Gon getting some kind of fight together when Gon was finally ready. Miryuum was also a really interesting antagonist as the leader of the Chimera Ants. His entire arc, along with the rest of the Chimera Ants, and the journey of self-discovery and individualism was great. You get a ton of variety with all of them because of the genius setup of anything that the queen eats becoming a blend of her meals. So you get all kinds of different ants. When you combine that with some of them having their human memories and how they all react to their own power levels. You get massive differences in how they develop, from characters like Cheetu to Ikago versus Welfin versus Colt, and on and on. Meruem in particular, I thought the show had a ton of balls with by allowing him to end up the strongest, but losing because of a nuke and sort of his naivete toward the larger world as a whole. And there's also the tragic aspect of him actually learning the value of life, but it's already too late by the time he's figured it out. I'm not going to go through every single side character because there's like 100 that are pretty interesting and well established, but there are so many that were well done, from the Phantom Troop to Melody, Kite, Chairman Netero, Knuckles, Shoot, plenty of the ants, and so on. The characters, I think, are really the strongest part of the show, and it really does a lot of the legwork for why it's so good. And I think the characters are the strongest part, but the next thing that I want to talk about, and maybe the thing that's most deserving for praise, is the way that the author committed to the story playing out in pretty logical ways based on the established characters, and it doesn't really pull any punches. There's so many points in the show where I think a lesser show would have simply bullshitted away for characters to stay alive. I was pretty surprised when Kurapika's whole crew that felt like they were going to become a decent part of the supporting cast just got mowed down. It was also great to see Gon just get the shit kicked out of him over and over when he stepped up to the wrong person, be it Hisoka, Guido, the Phantom Troop, or eventually him getting too big for his britches and getting Kite killed.
Now you see now, you done fucked up, you know that, don't you?
I mentioned it already, but allowing the strongest ants to be killed not by some kind of Super Saiyan style moment or some kind of late in the game power up, but by radioactivity after a self-sacrifice by Netero, I think just took huge balls from a writing perspective. Even killing Netero on its own is a pretty good move, but for him to go out like that and the main antagonist of half the series to die indirectly is something that I think 99% of shows wouldn't do, even though it makes logical sense in the story. I also really liked that the show was willing to let Killua and Kurapika kill people because it made sense for their characters. I think a less mature show might have tried to find a way for them to do the thing where they win, but then don't kill their opponents, and then their opponents somehow die from some other means once they've been established as the loser. If you're familiar with the show, Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, or Don Machi? This is something that kind of happens to Dix per Dix in that show, because that show is much lighter in tone and I think more targeted toward a bit of a younger audience. In the end, the show even lets Gon's rage cost him his abilities for what amounted to pointless revenge. Even characters you might not specifically be invested in, like the aunt, Peggy, just get suddenly mowed down by Meruem, and it's kind of a bummer. And I think this commitment to what makes sense for the story really sells the tension and emotional weight of the scenes, because it allows for the possibility of anything to happen. This isn't a show where you just know everyone's safe all the time. And I really think it might be the thing that the show deserves the most praise for.
Son of a bitch did it! Yeah!
The next thing that I want to praise is the Nen system and how power scaling is used throughout the series. There's a ton of risk when you make an original magic system, which is essentially what Nen is. I think conceptually, this is one of the easiest systems to understand the rules to, while it also allows for a wide range of abilities that feel like they still fit in the world. Letting people have specific talents and branching talents that aren't as effective, allowing for special abilities, leaving a lot of room for growth from Gon and Killua. The Nen system really does a ton to allow the story to grow and develop in a natural way that doesn't just feel like bullshit and ass pulls. It also allows for the power levels and power scaling to happen in a pretty organic way that's easily demonstrable to the audience. We see pretty quickly throughout the story where exactly each character stands strength-wise, and it allows you to appreciate Gon and Killua's natural talent, as well as Kurapika's creativity with his ability, which is viewed as kind of shitty. There's not really many times in the show where you're left wondering who's stronger at that moment or who should win a fight, which is a testament to how well established the rules are and how clearly exhibited the powers are between characters. When Hisako messes with Gon, you know Gon is severely outmatched. When Pito shows up to fight Kite, you know they fucked up and underestimated the ants. These are all really simple things, but super important for effective storytelling and making the action scenes have stakes. A bad example of this is Doctor Strange 2, where you have Scarlet Witch using magic, Doctor Strange using sorcery, and they're essentially just flinging CGI shit at each other until it's time for somebody to win.
You suck, you jackass!
There's even a point in that movie where Doctor Strange fights himself, and there's really no way to have any clue what the hell is happening. They're flinging music notes at each other and shit, and stuff's just flying all over the room until it's time for our Doctor Strange to win. Hunter x Hunter handles this brilliantly. It never feels excessive with the power scaling. Unlike a show like Seven Deadly Sins, where by the end, everyone is literally 100 times stronger than they were to start the show because they give you a number on their power, and everything just explodes all over the fucking screen. The last positive that I want to talk about is the exploration of the world. Hunter x Hunter feels like a unique world, and it doesn't feel like one giant homogenous culture or place. It doesn't feel like all the events center around two people in one location. It makes the story feel super dynamic. The Hunter exam feels way different from the Zoldyck estate, which feels way different from the Hunter's Arena and York New City. Obviously, Greed Island, regardless of how I feel, has a very video game-like dynamic and is still in the same world. The NGL and East Corto have very distinct cultures, where the NGL kind of feels like some hippie Amish bullshit. East Corto feels like a North Korea parallel, kind of a primitive type place. Whale Island has its own little small town feel. Meteor City is kind of like a prison colony, Wild West type place. It allows for the introduction of all kinds of characters and arcs, and it just makes the world feel real and big, and you're not stuck in one place. An example of this done poorly would be the new Star Wars stuff, where half the stories feel like they take place on fucking Tatooine, which is literally referred to as a remote backwater, and every Force user is a survivor of Order 66, and it just makes everything feel really small and unbelievable. Now to move on to the issues that I have with the show.
I'm never happy.
The biggest one for me is the inconclusive ending. When Gon meets his dad, he talks about an even bigger world at large, and it seems like the series, despite being almost 150 episodes, is just getting set up for the larger plot. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you should probably keep in mind that when this was written, it was the era of Bleach and One Piece and Dragon Ball Z and Naruto and so on, where all these shows had hundreds of episodes on their own, and even more if you include the spin-offs. With the plot and world being so open-ended, I could easily see the story going for twice as long. The show covered about 340 chapters of the manga. Roughly 70 have been written since, in like a decade, due to the author's health. Obviously, it's not really anyone's fault that the author had health issues, and maybe he had the best laid plans and ideas, but if they never get made, it doesn't really matter. And as far as the anime, I can only look at what we have. Meta stuff aside, as far as the story goes, it almost feels like this could be a jumping off point for Gon and Jane to go off on an adventure together. We get Gon finally completing his goal, but also possibly being retired as a hunter forever since he can't use Nen again. Though my guess is if the author had stayed in good health and kept cranking out chapters, is that he would eventually get his power back, and if the manga goes on long enough, I would think that he would. So it feels sort of conclusive, but still really open with a lot of possibilities. Hisoka, though he reappears right at the end, has his story essentially cut off at the knees halfway through. The same applies to Leorio. It sounds like in the manga, Kurapika becomes the main character, but as far as the show goes, he's cut out about halfway through, with his entire revenge arc left undone, along with his side chick Melody. Kahlua had a great arc, but is now also in a position where his story is wide open to pretty much any possibility going forward, whether it's a journey on his own or with Gon or Kurapika, who knows. Kite gets his rebirth right at the end, but there's not really any time to do anything with him or the pink koala ant. The hunters get a new chairman, and that could be a really interesting change in the hunter culture and rules, but again, there's no time. And I'm not going to keep going on and on about it, but I think the point is pretty clear. The story just feels kind of truncated suddenly. Maybe it's the best that could be hoped for given the situation of the manga and the author's health. It's still kind of a bitter pill to swallow as far as it being the end of the anime. The next thing that I want to move on to is some of the world building. The two biggest issues for me are Gon and Kahlua's ages and how unscrupulous they are with giving out hunter licenses. Gon and Kahlua being 12 to 13, I think stretches believability of the story and their strength in general. I get the whole they're prodigies, 1 in a million talent, and to be fair, when they encounter high-level adults, they do both get their asses beat routinely, or run away in Kahlua's case. But even with a world with superpowers, you have to consider that they're both prepubescent, which is a massive limiter for your physical strength, and one of the things that they're both supposed to be the best at. I think even just making them like 15-ish would have made the story function a little bit better in that regard. This doesn't even get into the fact they both learn techniques at insanely high levels in weeks or months that other characters in the story take decades to learn. I'm just not a fan of prodigy children in general.
'Cause fuck them, that's why.
because it tends to function as this justification to just make them as powerful as they can be and need to be for the story as fast as possible. With the whole story taking place in the span of like a year and a half to maybe 2 years, they go from not even knowing what Nen is to seemingly being in the like 90th percentile or maybe even higher strength wise. It doesn't break or ruin the story for me. I'm just not a fan of this super condensed timeline in general. The other issue that I have is with the hunter licenses not having a personality component to them. They're in the 287th class. So on the low end, if we assume about 5 passes per year, there's been roughly 1,500 hunters total. Could be more or less, but I'm not sure about the exact history. But the idea that they would provide people with all of this power and resources and then personality just not factoring in is ludicrous. They kind of half address this in the final arc and say they want to start getting rid of hunters like Illumi who kill people.
Oh, good for you.
But I don't believe that they wouldn't have had psychos or even just the simple thought process of we need people who won't turn into power-hungry maniacs in this crazy super duper elite group of people in our society. And as far as world building goes, I'm not sure if there's a better way to put it than just fucking retarded. To give you a sort of real world comparison, the FBI has roughly 13,000 special agents. I actually interviewed for one of those in real life, and you are required to do multiple interviews, a physical fitness test, a polygraph, background check on every place you've lived, your finances, your spouse's background, your family's background, and interviews with many people that you've worked with or known personally. FBI agents are trusted with relatively a lot of authority in our society, but nowhere near as much as what the hunters have in this world. The idea that they'd risk that kind of power in the hands of just anyone who isn't verified to be super trustworthy is just idiotic. The next issue I have with the story is Gon's dad, Jing. Fuck Jing. I hate that Gon's central motivation is his absolute scumbag dad. It doesn't necessarily damage Gon's character as much as it just makes it hard to root for him to accomplish his primary goal. Jing just rolled out on his son because he wanted to be an adventurer and just throws out that he's not a great person as if him acknowledging it makes it less ridiculous. Frankly, to me, it feels like a bunch of lampshading bullshit. Like just the idea that he acknowledges it and the story acknowledges it is enough to make it not ridiculous. And it's a decision that I just don't understand because a more traditional version of this is where we find out that Jing had to leave out of some sense of obligation. He got stuck away from home. And this makes Gon's goal and drive feel much more worth it and rewarding than his dad just being a colossal deadbeat. Not only does he leave, he literally makes it deliberately harder for his son to find him. I would say practically impossible.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
He sets up the only clue to be completely inaccessible if Gon doesn't become a hunter. Then, even if he becomes a hunter, he has to go into Greed Island, which there are limited copies of at an outrageous price. Then, if he can actually get a copy, he has to be the first one to beat it when it's a game that has been around for years, and if Gon didn't become a hunter until he was older, like 20, it would be decades, and could have already been beaten. And even if he overcomes all of this, if he chooses the wrong card, not even for an intentional reason, and doesn't figure out the hidden clue, which luckily he figures out the hidden clue, it takes him to the wrong person. Even then, if Netero hadn't died, how would Gon ever have found him? Gon is literally in a coma with it being a complete unknown if he'll ever wake up, and Jing in the same town doesn't even visit him at this point in the story.
Are you fucking retarded? The hell's the matter with you?
Then when Gon miraculously wakes up, thanks to Kalua's bullshit sibling power, Jing avoids him and tells him that they can meet at the top of the world tree. So his son, who just woke up from a coma, has to climb a tree which only a small percentage of people every year each make it to the top of.
My God, that poor kid.
I hate everything about him, and other than the crowd booing him at the election, he's mainly portrayed as kind of a positive or playful thing or kind of a joke. Jing's response to everything is, he's my son, it'll be fine. As if he completely trusts in genetics and his 3-year-old son that he doesn't even know. He's just completely assured that he'll follow in his footsteps. And annoyingly, I actually like the lesson that Jing teaches him at the very end about enjoying the journey, and the things that he values the most were the people he met along the way to his goal and not the actual goal itself. But it just feels really hollow coming from him when he couldn't even be bothered with raising his son and creating those moments that he claims are so precious along the way. I fucking hate Jing. The last thing that I had issue with was just some of the pacing decisions. It's not earth-shattering or story-breaking, but it does feel like the story could have used a bit of cleaning up and probably told the same story with about about 30 less episodes. You obviously have to have training and development, but I thought the show early on did a really good job of blending training and story together. We see Gon learn during the Hunter exam. We see Leorio, Kurapika, and Gon get stronger at the Zoldyck family house. The Heaven's Arena arc furthers the world building with Nen and the relationship between Gon and Hisoka. This all feels really natural, and both the story and their power levels progress at the same time. These arcs are also only about 5 episodes for the Zoldyck family arc, 10 for the Heaven's Arena arc, and the Hunter exam was its own arc with a little bit of training mixed in. Even if you didn't love the story progression, which I felt like it was there, these are nice little arcs that feel pretty tight time-wise. The Greed Island arc is 17 episodes, and story-wise, other than making me dislike Jing, doesn't really feel like it accomplishes much outside of a couple neat fights and some training. It does end up sending them to Kite, but this obviously could have been accomplished in any other manner, with probably 1 episode of writing. Even if it was something as simple as, oh, there's supposed to be good monsters to fight at the NGL, why don't we go check it out? Obviously, you need more detail than that, but you get the point. The Chimera Ant arc, for as good as it is, does feel like it takes random breaks to put the story almost on hold in order to let them train and get stronger. And it just feels like the series goes from the early parts of accomplishing multiple things at once to only focusing on one aspect at a time, whether it's character, training, story. It doesn't feel like it has multiple things fitting in each scene quite as much later on as it does early in the series. The 13th chairman election arc feels like a lot of fucking around with what ends up being a generally pointless election, given the result and the timing in the series. I do enjoy the Kahlua parts and seeing more of his family, but the overall arc feels like it could have been half as long. Again, none of this is groundbreaking or new, doesn't make you want to turn the show off, but there's definitely an odd pace to the story where it feels like at certain points it kind of grinds to a halt and just becomes much less efficient storytelling. Overall, the issues that I brought up here aren't a huge deal by and large. I still feel like they need to be pointed out. I thought this was a great show. It's absolutely earned its reputation as one of the classics. Now that I've seen it, I can definitely see the influence it's had on other shonen in general. Tyler, I think you got your money's worth out of this member request. I'll just leave it there for this one. I don't want to keep going on and on about it. You can see more of an episode to episode, arc to arc breakdown on the channel if you want. If you've seen the show, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.